At my own daughter's party, her husband told me I wasn't welcome. He had no idea I could end it all with one decision. I turned 65 last winter. It's a strange age. Not old enough to give up on life, but old enough to know the people you love can disappoint you in ways you never thought possible. For most of my life, my daughter, Emma, was my pride and joy. Her mother passed away when Emma was just 13. From then on, it was just me and her. I worked 2 jobs for years, saving every penny I could to keep us afloat, to make sure she could have a good education, and a home where she felt safe. I gave her everything. When she met Jason, her now husband, I tried to be supportive. He wasn't exactly the type of man I had pictured for her, a bit too smooth, a bit too quick with his words, always looking at his phone instead of the person in front of him. But she loved him, and that was enough for me. At least, it used to be. I remember the day of the party. Emma had called me a week before to tell me there was going to be a big celebration at their house. She sounded excited, but oddly hesitant. "It's just a little get-together," she had said, her voice careful. I didn't think much of it. I even went out and bought a new shirt for the occasion. When the evening came, I drove across town, rehearsing in my head the smile I would give her when she opened the door. It was already dark when I arrived. The driveway was packed with cars. I could hear laughter spilling out from the house, music playing low in the background. I walked up the steps, knocked on the door, and waited. It wasn't Emma who opened it. It was Jason. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh," he said flatly, like I was a surprise guest he didn't know what to do with. I tried to step inside, but he didn't move. "Jason," I said, a little confused, "is Emma here?" He leaned against the doorframe, blocking my view. "She's busy," he said. "Listen, you weren't actually invited tonight." I thought I had misheard him. "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably but kept his tone firm. "This is more of a private thing for our friends. We didn't really plan for you to be here." For a moment, my mind went blank. I could hear the laughter from inside, and somewhere in that room was my daughter, the same girl who used to run to me after school, holding my hand like I was her whole world. I swallowed hard. "Emma knows I'm here?" I asked. Jason looked away for a split second, then back at me. "It's just better if you head home tonight." My hands trembled, but not from the cold. I wanted to push past him, to demand to see her, but something in his face told me it would only make a scene she might not defend me in. I turned slowly, each step down the porch heavier than the last. When I reached my car, I sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel. Anger, sadness, disbelief, they all swirled inside me. But beneath it all, there was something else. Resolve. I had kept something from them. Something that, until that moment, I had never considered using. When Emma got married, I had helped them buy their house. I had co-signed the mortgage, paid for most of the down payment, and in the years since, I had been quietly covering the property taxes without telling them. It wasn't charity. It was love. It was my way of making sure my daughter had a stable home, a place to raise a family. They didn't know that without me, they might not be able to keep it. I drove home that night without calling her. Not out of spite, but because I needed time to think. The house was quiet when I walked in. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the folder in my desk drawer where all the documents were kept. One phone call. That's all it would take. One call to the bank, and their comfortable life would change overnight. I didn't make the call, not yet. Instead, I sat there, replaying the last few years in my mind. The times I had offered to help fix something around their house, only for Jason to wave me off like I was in the way. The holidays where he spent more time in another room than at the dinner table. The way Emma's laughter had changed, quieter, more measured when he was around. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted my daughter to remember who had been there for her long before Jason ever showed up. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma. "Dad, I heard you came by last night. I'm sorry if Jason was weird. It was just a bad time." No mention of inviting me in. No explanation that made sense. I stared at the screen, wondering if she even knew what had happened. A part of me wanted to tell her everything right then, about the mortgage, about the taxes, about how easily I could pull the rug out from under them. But I didn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about one party. It was about a pattern I had been ignoring for too long. I decided to wait. To watch. To see if she reached out again, not because she felt guilty, but because she cared. As the days passed, I kept to myself. I worked in my garden, fixed the squeaky gate out front, took long walks in the park. But every time I passed my desk, that folder seemed to call to me. It wasn't just paper. It was power. And the truth was, I had never wanted to use it. Until now. The following week, I saw them at the grocery store. Emma looked surprised, maybe even a little nervous. Jason just gave me a short nod, like we were nothing more than casual acquaintances. Dad, Emma said quickly, we're in a bit of a rush, but we should catch up soon. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Sure, I said. I watched them walk away, and I could feel the distance between us growing with each step. That night, I sat at my table again, the folder in front of me. One decision. That's all it would take. And maybe, just maybe, the time was coming when I'd finally make it. I didn't sleep much that night. The thought of what Jason had said to me at the party kept looping in my mind. The audacity, the complete disregard for all the years I had poured into making sure Emma never went without. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, wondering if Emma even knew the truth about how deeply I had been involved in her life even after she was grown. When the sun finally came up, I made coffee, sat by the window, and thought about what to do next. I didn't want to hurt Emma. She was still my daughter. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that she had allowed a wall to grow between us, and Jason was standing right on the other side of it, happy to keep it there. In the days that followed, I kept my routine. Morning walks, a little time in the garden, the occasional visit to the hardware store where I'd talk to Bill, the owner, about small repairs around the house. I didn't tell anyone about the party. Part of me was too embarrassed. Another part didn't want to hear people tell me to just let it go. One afternoon, about a week later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Emma. Her voice sounded polite, but distant. Dad, I was wondering, could you help us with some repairs on the house? The roof is leaking in one spot. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the irony. The same man who told me I wasn't welcome at their party had no problem letting Emma ask me for help when they needed it. Sure, I said calmly. I'll take a look. I didn't mention the party. Not yet. The next day I drove over. The house looked the same as always, neatly painted, with flowers in the front yard that I had planted myself the summer after they moved in. Emma greeted me at the door. She hugged me, but it was quick. Jason wasn't home. We went around the back to look at the roof. She pointed to a small area where the shingles had curled. I told her it was an easy fix. As I worked, I could hear her inside, talking on the phone, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. It made me stop for a moment, wondering who she was talking to. When I finished, she came out with a glass of lemonade. Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate it, she said, looking at the ground. Her voice had that same hesitant tone it did when she first told me about the party. It was as if she knew there was something between us, but wasn't ready to talk about it. Neither was I. As I drove home, I thought about that folder again. It wasn't just a piece of leverage, it was a reminder that I still had a say in their lives, whether they realized it or not. That night, I took it out of the drawer. I flipped through the papers, reading every line. Mortgage agreements, tax receipts, insurance documents. My signature was everywhere. It felt strange, holding physical proof that I was the backbone of their home, and yet being treated like an outsider. A few days later, I ran into Jason at the gas station. He was filling his car, wearing that same smug expression. Hey, he said, nodding. Jason, I replied evenly. He glanced at me, then at the pump. Emma said you fixed the roof. Thanks for that. I looked at him carefully. There wasn't an ounce of genuine gratitude in his tone. It's my daughter's house, I said. His jaw tightened slightly. Right, he said, then changed the subject. I wanted to tell him right there, in the middle of that gas station, exactly how much I had done for them. But I didn't. Because timing mattered. 2 weeks later, Emma invited me over for dinner. It was the first time she had extended the invitation since the party. When I arrived, the table was set, candles lit. Jason was there, making small talk, acting as if nothing had happened. I played along, asking about work, the house, and their plans for the summer. But underneath the polite conversation, there was a tension neither of us acknowledged. Halfway through dinner, Emma excused herself to take a phone call. Jason leaned back in his chair, looking at me. So, about that night, he began. I didn't move. What night? I asked, though we both knew exactly which one. The party, he said. Look, I just didn't think it was the right time for you to be there. It was a certain crowd. You know. I stared at him. No, I don't know, I said quietly. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, and didn't say anything else. Emma returned a moment later, and we went back to eating. I didn't bring it up again. But that night, when I got home, I sat with the folder again. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about respect. It was about control. For years, I had quietly been giving it away, letting Emma make choices, letting Jason take the lead in her life. But maybe it was time I stopped being silent. The following weekend, I called the bank. Not to do anything, just to ask questions. I learned exactly what would happen if I withdrew my support. It was all surprisingly simple. Too simple. When I hung up, I felt both powerful and uneasy. I still hadn't decided what I would do. I wanted to see if Emma would come to me, not for help, but for something real. A conversation. An acknowledgement. Anything. The days passed, and nothing came. No calls. No visits. Just silence. Until one evening, when my phone rang. It was Emma. Her voice was softer than usual. "Dad, can we talk?" I agreed. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Over coffee, she fidgeted with her hands. "I feel like things have been off between us," she said. I nodded. "They have." She glanced out the window. "I don't know if Jason told you, but," I interrupted. "He told me enough." She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who used to run to me after school. "I didn't know he turned you away that night," she said quietly. "I thought you couldn't make it." I studied her face. If she was lying, she was doing a good job hiding it. "I showed up for you," I said. "Like I always have." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. "I'm sorry, Dad." We talked for another hour, mostly about small things. But when we left, I noticed she hugged me a little tighter than usual. I still hadn't told her about the folder. About the one decision that could change everything. And as I drove home, I realized I wasn't sure if telling her would be an act of love or a declaration of war. The following week passed slowly. I kept busy with small projects around the house, but my mind kept returning to that conversation with Emma at the diner. Her apology had been sincere, or at least it had felt that way. But there was still something missing. She hadn't asked what it felt like to stand on her porch that night, hearing her husband tell me I wasn't welcome. She hadn't asked what that moment did to me. And I wasn't sure she ever would. On Thursday afternoon, I got a call from the bank again. Not because I had reached out, they were following up on the questions I'd asked earlier. The woman on the line explained, very matter-of-factly, that my cosigner status gave me certain options. Options that would have immediate consequences. I thanked her and hung up, my heart beating a little faster. It wasn't the kind of power I had ever wanted to hold over my daughter. But Jason's face at the party kept coming back to me, the smugness, the certainty that I had no place there. That certainty could be taken from him in a heartbeat. Friday evening, Emma called again. This time, she invited me over for lunch on Sunday. She said Jason would be there too. I almost said no. But something in her tone made me curious. On Sunday, I drove over. The weather was warm, and the front door was open, letting in a soft breeze. Emma greeted me with a smile, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. Jason was in the kitchen, arranging plates on the counter. We sat outside at the patio table. Emma made small talk about the garden, the neighbors, the leaky roof I'd fixed. Jason stayed quiet at first, sipping his drink. Then, halfway through the meal, he set his glass down and looked at me. "I think we started off on the wrong foot," he said. I didn't respond right away. "What makes you think that?" I asked finally. He glanced at Emma, then back at me. "I know you've done a lot for Emma. For us. And I might not have shown enough appreciation." I studied him carefully. There was a slight stiffness to his words, like they had been rehearsed. Still, it was more than I had heard from him before. Emma reached across the table and touched my hand. "I told him about the diner," she said softly. "I told him I didn't know what happened that night until you told me." I looked between them. Jason's expression didn't give much away. But there was something in Emma's eyes, hope, maybe, that made me hold my tongue. We finished lunch without any raised voices or sharp words. Afterward, Emma asked me to stay a little longer. Jason went inside to take a phone call, and she sat across from me, leaning forward. "Dad, I don't want us to drift apart," she said. I nodded. "I don't either." She hesitated. "I know Jason can be blunt sometimes. But I want us to try. Please." I thought about the folder at home. About the quiet threat I had been carrying around in my desk drawer. And I thought about how different this conversation might be if she knew. When I left that afternoon, Emma hugged me longer than she had in months. Jason stood in the doorway, giving a small nod. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't dismissive either. Driving home, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could choose to push things, to force respect through action. Or I could wait and see if this was the start of a shift. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat in my living room. The folder was on the table in front of me. I didn't open it. I just sat there, staring at it, wondering which road I would take. The next week, Emma called again. This time it wasn't about an invitation. It was about help. They were having trouble with the water heater. I told her I'd come by. When I arrived, Jason was in the garage. He greeted me with a simple, "Hey." We worked together to move some things so I could reach the water heater. It wasn't an overly friendly exchange, but there was no edge to his voice either. After an hour, the problem was fixed. Jason handed me a cold bottle of water. "Thanks," he said, and this time it sounded genuine. Emma joined us in the garage, smiling. "See? You two can work together." I gave a small smile but didn't say anything. Later that evening, as I was leaving, Jason stopped me at the door. "I meant what I said at lunch," he told me. "I appreciate what you've done for us." I didn't answer right away. "Just take care of my daughter," I said finally. He nodded. Driving home, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, things were starting to shift. But I also knew that change could be temporary. People could slip back into old patterns. The folder was still in my drawer. And the decision still hadn't been made. 2 weeks later, Emma invited me over again. This time it was for a barbecue with a few friends. When I arrived, Jason greeted me at the door. "Glad you could make it," he said. It was such a simple phrase, but it landed heavier than I expected. Throughout the evening, he made an effort, offering me a drink, introducing me to his friends, asking about my work on the garden. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Emma looked happy. And that made me pause. Because maybe this was all I needed, not dominance, not control, but a seat at the table. Still, as I drove home, the thought lingered. What if this was only temporary? What if I gave up my leverage, and they forgot again? The folder stayed in my drawer for months. Every so often, I would take it out, run my fingers over the papers, and then slide it back into place. It was almost like a silent companion, something that reminded me I still had a choice in all of this. But with each visit, each phone call, and each shared meal, the urge to use it started to fade. Emma kept inviting me over. Sometimes for dinner, sometimes just for coffee in the middle of the afternoon. Jason was there for most of these visits. And over time, I noticed the edges softening. He wasn't the man who had stood in the doorway that night, blocking me from entering. He was quieter now, more measured. He'd ask about my garden, my walks, the old friends I still saw from time to time. One evening, after a Sunday roast, we sat outside while Emma put the dishes away. Jason leaned back in his chair, looking out toward the fence. "I didn't get it before," he said quietly. I glanced at him. "Get what?" "What it means to have someone in your corner for decades. You've been that for Emma. I see that now." I didn't answer right away. There was no grand apology, no tearful confession. Just a simple truth spoken plainly. And somehow, that felt better than anything else he could have said. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice Emma's laughter again. It was fuller, freer, more like the girl I remembered. Sometimes I'd catch Jason looking at her that way too, with the same kind of quiet admiration I used to have for her mother. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still moments when old habits crept in, a quick remark from Jason that felt dismissive, a hesitation from Emma that told me she was keeping the peace. But those moments didn't linger the way they used to. We had started showing up for each other again. One afternoon, Emma came over to my house. We sat on the porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the clouds drift by. "Out of nowhere," she said, "I know you've done more for us than you've ever said." I looked at her. She didn't press for details. She didn't need to. In that moment, I realized she probably knew more than I had given her credit for. And maybe that was enough. That night, I took the folder from my drawer. I opened it, slowly, looking through every page one last time. Then I put it back. This time, it wasn't because I needed to keep it close. It was because I didn't feel the need to hold it over them anymore. The decision I had been carrying for so long no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a choice I could simply let go. A few weeks later, we all went to a small neighborhood fair. Emma insisted on buying me a slice of apple pie from one of the stalls. Jason laughed when I won a cheap stuffed bear at one of the games and handed it to a little girl passing by. It wasn't a grand event, but it was the kind of day you remember, not because of what happened, but because of how it felt. As the sun began to set, we walked back to the car. Jason walked beside me, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, "I'm glad you came that day for lunch. I think that's when things started to turn around." I nodded. Maybe he was right. Or maybe the truth was simpler. Maybe things turned around because I chose not to make that call. Not out of fear. But out of hope. Hope that my daughter's happiness was worth more than proving a point. When I got home that night, I sat at my kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. For the first time in a long time, the folder didn't cross my mind. It was still there, tucked away, but it no longer felt like it defined the space between us. We had built something new in its place. Something imperfect, but real. And that was enough.